Okay, welcome everyone to today's Knowledge Exchange webcast panel discussion. We're here to discuss a topic on many people's minds, especially in the world of atmospheric sciences, and that is the impacts of the current administration's NOAA/National Weather Service cuts, both current and proposed, on the public and private sectors. I'm your host, Michael Gerun, and we're fortunate to have with us a great panel of guests today, including Matt Rogers, the president of CWG. We've got Dr. Paul Roundy, a professor at Albany University, and Derek Diehl, a student at Rutgers University. Now, before I start off with the first question, I want to read a quick answer that was given to us by someone in our network that we reached out to that wished to remain anonymous, but still felt it was important to answer some of these questions, as you know they are important questions. So the first question that he answered was, how has the current administration's policies towards NOAA affected your career path? So they responded by saying the current policies have made some parts of their job more challenging. The termination of their probationary employees in late February reduced some of the functions that they were able to carry out. They can't travel except for mission critical reasons, which is extremely difficult to justify. So they're missing opportunities to connect with colleagues at workshops and other scientific meetings. The uncertain job market has added considerable stress and uncertainty for the younger scientists that this person mentors. Everyone they work with is concerned that they will not have the resources going forward to advance the science, research, and model development like they had in the past. And going forward, if the administration's fiscal year 26 budget priorities are passed, they likely will not be able to continue working for NOAA at all, in which case they will have to make a difficult decision if they want to continue doing the sort of scientific research that they've been doing, and will likely even have to leave the U.S. because they don't expect many opportunities to remain in the country for quite a while. That naturally would be a hardship and a disruptive experience. If they want to stay in the U.S., then they'll likely have to pursue a new career in the private sector, and believe that this could be rewarding, but would likely have to abandon many research projects, collaborations, international engagements, and mentorship responsibilities that they've spent decades investing in. This sort of transition would, be very difficult to say the least, and that's where it ends. I just wanted to start off with that because, that's coming directly from someone that, has been impacted by these changes and, seemed like a pretty powerful, description. Now, without further ado, now that I've read that, we'll start off with the first question, and I want to have Derek start us off here, since he's. I think this question has a different effect on him than the other two panelists we have. So, Derek, my question for you is, how has the current administration's policies affected your career path?
Thank you, Michael. So it has actually impacted my career path in a pretty substantial way because in mid-January, I interviewed and was in fact selected for a National Weather Service summer volunteer position. And I was been selected for that. And obviously, that was kind of, almost like a dream internship, or at least a dream start to my career, kind of. For me personally, that stuff sounds very interesting to me. But then about a month later, I got a call from the head forecaster that internship, or it's more a volunteer position, but that volunteer position had unfortunately been cut, and that maybe I come up for like one or two job shadows or one or two field operations work, so that the whole internship was off. So that's obviously one very bad way that it has. Thankfully, what I have been able to do, and this isn't confirmed yet, so I'm not going to say what company it is, but I have been informally told at least that there was another private firm that is going to select me as an intern, what I've heard. So fortunately, it's not a matter of if I have an internship, it was what internship I ended up getting. But yeah, essentially that the start to my career, my whole career has really been kind of shifted pretty dramatically by this decision. It definitely, kind of shook my confidence. Like, man, over my head, am I in the right field? And there were definitely those doubts that kind of, you know, kind of crept up in my mind. But after thinking about it, I think been studying it for 3 years, so I'll stick with it.
Yeah, and then I think that, first of all, let me say it's unfortunate that you lost that first internship, but it's congratulations on, it sounds like you got another one lined up, and
Hmm.
that's always great.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, you've had, it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, that you kind of were thinking, you would have preferred the National Weather Service internship, maybe?
Hmm. My
Was that
gut
like
tells
where you're
me my gut tells me I'd prefer that. I'd have to think more about it honestly, but if I had to choose right now, probably NWS.
right? Yeah, and that's, I'm sure that's not a uncommon story from people in your position.
Hmm.
But thanks for sharing that answer. Moving now, would either Dr. Roundy or Matt Rogers, would you like to, do you have anything you want to add to that before I ask your versions of these questions?
I felt like I was in a similar situation back in the mid 1990s when I came out of school in 1994. There was some government shutdowns occurring at that time, thanks to, I think it was like Newt Gingrich, but at the same time, on the other side, Al Gore was doing the reinventing government thing, so they were laying people off from the government at that point as well. So the National Weather Service had frozen hiring at that time, and myself and a lot of my colleagues, I was planning to go into the National Weather Service. That was what I thought my career path was going to be. And it was not available to me at that time. And I was determined not to go home empty-handed after graduating from college. So, I scoured for private sector opportunities. Some of my colleagues, though, went on the research route. They were going to maybe go into NOAA as well, but they stayed got advanced degrees at various universities on the research route. And a few of us went out into the private sector. But I did sense that there was some growth in the private sector during that time. There was a bit of a brain drain in the government, so you saw some increase in private sector meteorology opportunities. A number of competing shops were, picking up more people and things like that. The economy was in a different state at that time. That's to be fair. So that may play it differently this time. We'll see how that evolves. But it is interesting to me because what I thought was what I wanted to do was actually I don't regret anything. I really prefer what I did, and it was a great opportunity for me to expand into a commodity sector, and it's been really fruitful. So it's you say there's a different version of this question for me, I suppose,
Yeah,
but
there is.
that's my take on that, Derek. It's just to kind of keep an open mind and look for those opportunities amid the problems for sure. So
So there's no control experiment going along with your life.
Hmm.
yeah,
Make a
Yeah,
decision. You
exactly.
can go back and compare with what would have happened, but you can look back and think about how you built yourself.
Hmm.
And you want to just take all the opportunities that you can find in whatever situation you're in.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of my mindset. I'm open to pretty much anything in the field of meteorology, and I'm just want to help, and I'll just start anywhere.
Yeah, that's a good attitude to have, and I'm really glad both of you, said what you said, because like I mentioned earlier, Derek he's still in school, so he's got his whole career ahead of him, and
hmm
you have to, like you said, you even went through something pretty similar back in 1994. You
yeah,
said so.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I
And
think,
I'd say you're doing pretty well for yourself now.
Oh, it's yeah, it works out, I think, just you'll find your way. So it like I say, keep an open mind and I mean, I was doing everything. I was interviewing at air pollution companies. I was doing all sorts of different things like for pollution modeling and things like that. It was all sorts of different types of companies I interviewed at just to see what was a good fit for me. And yeah, so it's just keep an open mind.
Yeah, and just to keep us on track, I don't, it's not the point of our webcast isn't to necessarily give Derek advice. It was important though, so I
Yeah.
That
wanted to
doesn't sound
just
too
It's on
bad to me,
everybody's minds. Yeah. Yeah.
actually.
um, but so Matt, your version of this question is how has the current administration's policies towards NOAA affected your company in particular?
It hasn't affected us too much at this point. The only thing that has impacted us is that we were hiring for a new position that we're going to be filling in June, and or maybe in May here coming up. But and we had a larger than normal amount of applicants, so it was a lot of extra work this time, understandably.
Yeah.
But we are hiring currently, and I think we had about almost 200 applicants, and we're down to the final 10 now, according to our search team. So we're getting there, but in a sense, that's it's a very unfortunate situation. I feel bad for everyone on the NOAA side of things, but in terms of us trying to choose another coworker, it gives us more options than we've had before, I guess, in this situation. So, but that's the only direct impact that we've had at this point. We're still a lot of things are waiting to happen, with certain
Right.
cuts and things. And I think there was another issue this week that was coming up with some contract was going to get canceled that affected some NOAA data feeds that has not happened yet. So any of those sort of kind of threats that are out there haven't really materialized yet. So we haven't had any other impacts besides the excess applicants.
Okay. I mean, that's, seems like if there is a silver lining, that, that could be it, with
Yeah.
get a lot more applicants in there. Always a good thing to have. And I'll just mention if anybody wants to chime in with a response to anything, feel free to do so. Just don't talk over each other. With that being said, Derek or Paul, do you have anything you want to add to Matt's comments?
I suppose I had a feeling that that was going to be the case, but from like the side of the students, it makes the whole application process a bit more daunting because, there was a feeling when you graduated that there'd be a seat at the table for you, but that several more seats have been taken away. So is it going to be when the music ends, will you have anywhere to sit down? I know I'm not accusing you of anything, but that's just the way it is right
Right.
now.
Oh, totally
I
understand
wish it
that.
could be different, but that's just kind of my feeling on things.
Yes, I totally understand that. It's now a more crowded field. There's a whole bunch of people
Yeah.
looking for a smaller set of number of jobs that are out there, so it changes the math quite a bit. One of the things I did in 1994 was I started sending applications to companies that were not hiring, and because I knew they had weather expertise, and so I sent it. And the job I got at Earthsat in 1994 in Rockville, Maryland, they were not officially hiring at that time. They were thinking about hiring; it crossed their mind, but they weren't there yet. And so when my resume came across, I was basically competing against myself at that point. There was nobody else for the job, and it saved them a lot of time too because they didn't want to have to go through this whole process. So I interviewed a few times with them, and it worked out. But so there's things to think about and things like that. But yeah, I totally understand. I would again keep an open mind I called it carpet bombing back in the day. But I was just everywhere I could think of, I was sending things out. So, yeah.
So as a student coming into that market, there's now a lot of experienced competition
Yes, that's a
for
good
the
point.
position you might have been seeking for. From the company's perspective, you have this great opportunity of hiring someone with experience you might not have ever had an opportunity otherwise to find, and so it's a mixed bag, and I think harmful to some and beneficial to others. I hope that if a lot of these closures really do happen, like OAR potentially totally dissolving,
Mm.
there's so much talent and so much creativity that they'll start creating new ideas. They'll join with existing companies or make their own and feel that there's going to be a vacuum created by this lack of material that NOAA had been providing. And some of those things can be turned to a profit.
Mhm.
And go ahead, Derek. Sorry.
Yeah. And that's kind of something that I've kind of thought about too. Like, what if, because I know there's a lot of like National Weather Service offices that are kind of, pretty understaffed now, and there's like many other issues. I almost wonder if like individual like states like New York or Illinois or California could kind of pick up the slack. So that's still kind of a government job. Or like you said, you could just have the private sector fill that vacuum.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the NOAA, the National Weather Service, has been understaffed for years. So it's not really a new thing. And at times in the past, they've had layoffs and shrunk the workforce and
Hmm.
had to figure out how to adapt. And at this point, there are going to be services that are going to be left behind.
Hmm.
But at the same time, if you look at the proposed budget going forward, even if Congress just enacted that as it is, what's most cut is climate research. Um,
Hmm.
the weather, the CPC, the National Weather Service, these actually have some increases in their budgets from here forward if they enact that, and I expect that Congress is going to play in to make some further adjustments along those lines. But historically, I mean, in recent years, I mean, it's like 10 times the amount of research money at NOAA has been spent on climate over weather.
Hmm.
And in my view, this should have been closer to a balance. I mean, in terms of operational issues, understanding and predicting a tornado next week may be more important from an operational perspective than predicting what the trend in tornadoes will be in 50 years.
Hmm.
Um, the weather, the weather is more immediately important, and by doing the weather well, we also do the climate better.
And, and and just one quick thing I wanted to add about that on our job announcement is that we are focusing on entry level positions. We have a lot of new graduates coming in. We do find a lot of value in that. We when we hired in 2023, we had a new graduate we hired as well, and they bring a lot more to the table in the sense of they have the latest in the science, the latest in the education. There's a lot of new things that we know we're in our way in our operational ways of doing things. It's great to bring in that new blood, new talent, and new insight from recent graduates. So we definitely don't discriminate against new applicants from just getting out of school. I think that's very there's great talent coming out of schools right now.
A lot of great points. But and we could probably spend the next 40 minutes talking about just this, honestly. But um, got to keep it moving, unfortunately. So, Dr. Roundy, you get to close off the question and your version of the question. So, how has the current administration's policies towards NOAA affected some of the research you do? Because I know you get do a lot of research, and the grants all come, I believe, from the federal government or most of them.
So I have a couple of NSF grants, one that is new last summer and one that is in 1 year extension right now that we're finishing spending this summer, and a NOAA grant that's in a year extension for transferring some forecast technology to the Climate Prediction Center. And one of my graduate students is working on that now, and it's still in active coordination with the folks at the CPC and NOAA. Um, my biggest impacts have been mostly in terms of concern about data situations in the future. And also, I did my postdoc at the NOAA Boulder labs at the time they had a massive restructuring. I was in the aeronomy laboratory back in 2005, and they shut that down and wrapped the people into various other organizations. I went to the physical sciences division with George Kaladas. Now George has taken the retirement offer um, and will be leaving NOAA, and will have a volunteer position there. If the organization continues, he'll have a volunteer position there after that. Um, but many of the older people, the more senior researchers there, have been taking the retirement in hopes that they can preserve an institution for the young people. But some of those organizations may just totally dissolve. The parts that are deemed necessary for operations will get wrapped into the Weather Service and a Climate Prediction Center and related operational organizations. And so the key in doing this is to try to preserve as much of the most important operationally relevant content that it can be done. Um, I'm grabbing some data sets as well, and I've got a server at home that I have started to acquire some data sets and other things so that I can work them there for my consulting activities. And I'm realigning many of my data feeds to parts of NOAA that I know will be more permanent, like the Climate Prediction Center, where they have the NCEP outgoing long-wave radiation feeds that I've used for years, but had switched to PSD, the Physical Sciences Division, and so I'm going to the more reliable original source.
Okay, I mean that's good at least though that it sounds like the research projects haven't been affected. Especially would be kind of unfortunate if a grad student spent years doing something and then it just got suddenly pulled from them in the last year. So that's good at least that those aren't haven't been affected. Um, does I hope that the data does continue to be available in the future though, but that's I think that's a bridge that we'll have to cross when we get there. Um, does anybody have any final comments that they want to have before we move on to the next question? Okay. So the next question, Matt, we'll start off with you. I think this is might be a little closer to your wheelhouse. The question is, how will the cuts to NOAA impact the general public?
Uh, yeah, that's a good question. It's just going to depend on what level of downsizing we see generally here in terms of reliability of NOAA updates and what we see from the various forecast WFO offices there and everything. But it's tough to say at this point. It's all kind of conjecture and we're not and hypothetical at this time. I think to Paul's point earlier, I think they have the strongest argument to preserve the basic operational roles and responsibilities of these individuals for daily forecast, for warnings, and it's one of those things that it can get out of hand fairly quickly if something gets missed or something. Then they can blame that, and then you refocus on it, kind of thing. It's certain something we've been dealing with you saw with the FAA earlier this year, and so I think that that will keep the imperative there for the general public to get their basic needs addressed. Now, there are things that they have cut back on that I've seen. There was I think there was an INSO blog that they had to cut back on. There may be that stratospheric blog as well. There's some ancillary type services that won't be available as much and everything like that. But the core, what's my high temperature going to be tomorrow? And is there a fog advisory tomorrow morning or whatever? That kind of stuff. I think that will continue. And if we see cuts in those areas, I think that would be quickly remedied as well. And so that's my guess at this point.
Yeah, and Paul, I see you nodding in agreement. So I assume if I ask the same question to you, what do you think the effects on the general public will be? What's your 2 cents on this?
So I think the immediate effects on the operational meteorology aren't going to be as large as the long-term effects of suppressing the research program. If there's substantially less research toward operations in the future, then if they're cutting back more of that, then there's a long-term impact that will start to show to the public, but they'll never see what they would have had. So it's unfortunate that we'll never know what the costs would have been if we had kept
Right.
with the projects as we were. I've wanted some realignment of government research for many years, how the priorities are decided, whether the money is allocated in climate versus weather. I want both funded, right?
Right.
But I think that weather has been taking the short end of the stick in comparison, and it didn't have to be this way. It was a choice. And I think part of what's going on, I think, is that there's this overall, I don't know, distrust of expertise, and the public has kind of shown this in the election and so forth. And I think we need to rebuild some of that.
Right. Yeah. And I could go on for Oh, I tell you, the number of things I've seen from people, people know I'm a meteorologist, and they don't ask me for whether, and they go to who knows where for their sources, and they show me these things, and I'm like, what? But that's a little too off topic for me to get into. Maybe afterwards I'll let you guys know about that story. Um, but since we're on the Derek, same question to you, and I know you've probably uh, you know uh, uh, you're pretty much on the front lines for the people that um would be tricked by things like TikTok meteorologists and all
Yeah.
meteorologists, sorry. Um, and I'm sure you've probably had to deal with some interesting statements from people. Have you noticed any effects to the general public, or do you think there'll be any effects to the general public? And have you experienced like anything from people that there's any kind of shift in the thinking towards the National Weather Service or NOAA in general?
So I think, first of all, I think that, you kind of mentioned the idea of like the social media meteorologist. And,
Yeah.
I don't I'm going to just defend these guys a little bit because there are some of them, like people you may know, Ryan Hall or Max Velocity, and people like that are, yes, I mean, a lot of them have degrees, some of them don't, but they're making like live streams of pretty accurate forecasting and they're in some cases saving lives. So I would just like to defend the social media meteorologists just a little bit. There are a lot of bad ones out there, but there are some good, a lot, but I feel like the best ones are the most popular in my opinion. But kind of going back to what you said about like reaction, I feel like everyone that I've kind of talked about it has at least to me expressed either sorrow that I lost the internship or a willingness to support the National Weather Service. I do think that, people across the political spectrum, because like not to get too political, but I know this issue was not really talked at all during the campaign. Like no one talks about it in the debates at all. No one really talks about it like on the campaign trail. So I think, supporters of all candidates in the last election, I feel like do support the National Weather Service, at least inherently. But I also have noticed, an increase in, I guess, anti-intellectualist behavior, both online and in person. Actually, it was funny. I was tabling for the Meteorologists Association for Rutgers, and we had a guy that came up to us and asked us, "So, what do you think of all these chemtrails that are going up?" And and I was actually ready to debate this guy, but then his wife's like, "Oh, sweetie, don't say those types of things to these people." So, but I just think that you mentioned distrust of the experts, and I think obviously people don't really necessarily understand that science is a changing field. People kind of, I'm not saying they ask too much, but I guess, just the way that media presents certain things, there is definitely a layer of, I don't know if I can really trust these people from these institutions. They're brainwashing people, not educating people, or at least that's the mindset some people might have.
I
Yeah,
think
it's
that we
go ahead, sorry.
we've kind of left the expert class has made a little bit of room. I mean, we've made some mistakes in recent years.
Yeah.
The pandemic was one of them, but how we communicate science uh, in terms of like it's a body of facts,
Hmm.
and I think what people need to see is our self-correction mechanisms.
Hmm.
What gives trust in science isn't that the experts are great or perfect. It's that we check each other.
Hmm. Right.
And when we have different biases and we check each other well, we check each other effectively, um, it helps us it helps us to kind of guide the overall ship in an effective direction. And the people can see that when we make mistakes, we admit it and we fix them.
Hmm. You said that perfectly. One other
Yeah.
thing, and sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
That's fine. I'm totally with you, Paul, on that. I feel like that from a climate standpoint, the doomsdayism had gotten a little out of hand, and I think there's been a little bit of the pendulum has swung a little bit on that, and so it's just not as, I think there's a response to that, and like I say, that science needs to be more balanced and correct the mistakes and maybe be a little bit more humble about it, perhaps. I don't know, but I think that's part of it too.
Yeah.
We choose
um, we choose how we share our information, right? And we like a good scientists will present uncertainty in what they do and where we have good confidence. And they'll look for perspectives and evidence that counters their viewpoint. And then we come forward and we think, well, the consensus on climate change is actually pretty close to what's likely to happen if we follow the present trajectory. You know, we're going to warm a couple of degrees C by the end of the century, and maybe 2.5 since pre-industrial. And well, that's not 7C or 10C. And there are people who are saying that it's likely to be 7C or 10C still. And people can see that, well, we didn't die 10 years ago. I think
Yeah.
hyperbole from the 1990s and was active, and people were saying we're going to make it till 2010 and society will collapse.
Mm.
No, most scientists weren't doing that, but a few activists were, and it changed the way the public viewed the experts. And we do so much better if they can see us correcting ourselves.
Yep, I agree.
Yep,
Yep.
definitely.
We have to do that in the commodity business too. I mean, you're not going to be perceived as credible if you're always chasing the headlines. You know, you have to say, okay, here's our forecast. Here's what we think is going to happen in the next 2 weeks. But if we're wrong, this is the other thing that we're watching that could, derail our thinking. And this is the other thing. So you have to offer that balanced assessment to establish the credibility, because you have to share your mindset, what you're thinking through, rather than just putting out the biggest headline possible, because then you lose credibility real fast. And I think that goes back to what Michael was saying earlier with some folks that, were doing that, and sometimes in social media and things, and to what Derek was saying is the more credible ones are the ones that are doing the best and the most popular. So
Yeah. One thing that also just I just came to mind that is a good example. I don't know if you were any of y'all were tracking the severe weather outbreak, or rather lack thereof, in Minnesota yesterday,
hmm.
because Stormwater Center put out like a moderate risk for like tornadoes. And what's interesting is that there have been many WFOs in that part of the country, like Nebraska, the Dakotas, Minnesota, that have had to suspend weather balloon launches.
Hmm.
Analyzing those QT diagrams is extremely important for forecasting severe weather events. So I guess they just erred on the side of caution. They had very much incomplete data, so I guess they erred on the side of caution and way over forecasted, I suppose.
Hmm.
So I guess if stuff like that keeps happening, it could kind of, become like a boy that cried wolf situation. Again, hopefully that weather balloon situation gets rectified soon. But if it lasts for too long, it could kind of, the false alarm rate could kind of go out of proportion, kind of.
Yeah, that's unfortunate to hear that, because that was a concern of mine, and I'm glad you brought it up, that it actually seems to have happened. That, because I hadn't heard of, I knew about one in Alaska. I didn't know they were also had lowered them in a place like, where'd you say, Nebraska, right?
In Nebraska, Dakotas,
Yeah,
Minnesota area.
that generally, yeah,
Hmm.
because that's kind of an important area for severe weather. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
there might be a name for that area, but um, that's so that's an interesting potential impact to the public, because if the public loses trust, as you've all have said, in like you said, the boy who cried wolf, when that if and when that tornado actually comes, and they're like, oh well, the last four were nothing,
Yeah.
then it becomes an issue. Now that the fifth time it's like, okay, well now it's actually happening. And that's something that we as meteorologists need to communicate to the public, like, hey, just because there's no tornado in your backyard doesn't mean that, the first time, or even the 100th time, doesn't mean that the 101st time it won't be in your backyard. That's something that I think is lost sometimes on the general public, and I think we as meteorologists need to, not always, but sometimes need to do a better job of explaining those kind of details in the forecast, because I think we take it for granted. We look at a probability. It's like, it says 10% chance of tornadoes in this area, and we know that that's pretty high. But
Yeah.
a normal person looks at 10%. It's like, oh, 10%, that's like nothing. Who cares? Um, and that's something, with and I think, going back to the how the cuts will affect this is, communication is, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, but communication is part of training. You got to be trained to be communicating these things properly, and if you cut the budget, you don't have as much money for training either, in addition to other things like research and other, stuff you guys have already mentioned. And that's going to hurt the public, I think. And, you guys can agree or disagree with the statement. I think that'll hurt the public more than any other, or maybe not any other, but a lot of the other potential impacts here from cutting the budget. Because, like you said, if that time comes, they have to err on the side of caution, because, and I'm with them on that, absolutely err on the side of caution. If there's a chance there's a tornado coming, please tell me. It's that one time, if it doesn't happen, then they have to, kind of, eventually it is going to be the situation. It's like, oh, they always say there's a tornado, that never happens. I've heard that from my own father sometimes.
Oh yeah,
not about tornadoes, but
the general public doesn't understand the difference between a watch and a warning, and they still don't. And
Exactly.
I get that on social media all the time, and so there's a lot of communication problems that we've had prior to this year, and so there's still a lot of issues that need to be addressed on that front for sure.
yeah, and just for the essence of time here, we're going to move on to the next question. But like I said, for the last 2 weeks, we could spend probably hours on each of these questions. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, we only have an hour, so we got to keep moving. Dr. Roundy, I'd like to start you off with this question. How will the cuts to NOAA affect academia in general? The research field and, all the research funding grants that come from NOAA and the federal government in general.
So a lot of that is supposition at this point still, because we don't know
Right.
where everything's going. But the OAR budget proposal actually basically dissolves that whole Office of Atmospheric Research. And so there's many millions of dollars in funding for mostly climate research, but also weather research in there. Some of that will get transferred to other NOAA offices in connection with operations instead of directly connected to research. And we don't know how Congress is going to modify these things. I think there's a lot of interest in Midwestern and Western states with respect to, say, climate drought research, and so it's a little bit more difficult for those things to just be turned off on a whim, but right now none of my grants have been affected. I haven't lost any of my funds in live grants that I was previously awarded. I've been getting indications that they're not going to change those existing grants, except if they had some kind of central DEI objectives. So most of the science-focused research to operations hasn't been cut at this point, but the new budgets would wipe out a lot of climate research.
Okay, and I think that's actually a good segue into our next question. And we'll stick with you since you already kind of mentioned it. So assuming, let's say worst case scenario, NOAA gets completely privatized, how would that impact academia as a whole, or research as a whole?
So ECMWF is partly private. Europe has been doing some of this kind of hybrid operations project for years, and we do it hybrid in the U.S. in the sense that the Weather Service provides a product, and other organizations can take that product and upgrade it or alter it in some way for public consumption. And so we've been doing it in a sense. It's just how far in the private goes and how far the federal goes is
Right.
the big difference, I think. But I don't think that there's been a clear proposal how such a thing would actually be carried out. I mean, there was some discussion of such a thing in the previous Trump administration that never materialized, in part because just thinking it through, it's just hard to figure out how to get it started and how to switch without losing important operational capacity. Um, but it's something that can be done and can be done very well. And some nations of the world do it in a fantastic way, and in fact, um, yielding better products than what we produce.
Right, right. Yeah, okay. That I mean, yeah, that makes sense. And it's good at least that in this, hypothetical situation, that, at least we'll have some sort of potentially at least equal product, to fall back on, hopefully, assuming, they there is a plan in place. Because like you said, they apparently thought about it during the 2016 administration, but it never materialized. Because, like you said, it does seem like it'd be fairly hard to replace it logistically speaking. There's a lot of offices all across the country, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, um, but yeah, so just to keep things moving, so similar question to you, Matt. How do you think if NOAA in this hypothetical scenario were completely privatized, how do you think that would impact the private sector meteorology space?
Yeah, it's just it just seems really unreasonable that it could ever get to that point. But like Paul was saying, to having maybe the modeling centers in a private type model, not being split up where many companies are competing, but having a model where they charge for their services for the top end model data and things like that, that may help invigorate the research side of it for the weather modeling side of things. And I think there might be a reasonable route forward there to mimic that model, the business model of the ECMWF. But gosh, daily observations from the ASOS stations, public warnings, AccuWeather tried that a little bit with trying to warn the public about hurricanes years and years ago, and it really blew back in their face. It was just because you're competing with the federal government. But imagine having three different companies trying to tell someone where to go when there's a tornado watch or warning or whatever, or a hurricane landfall, especially. So it just doesn't seem to be able to work practically. And also, you need a kind of a third party arbiter or some sort of final say in terms of think about a court case, and you have to know what the weather was like on a certain day, and you think of all the people in the courtrooms, and they have to know, well, Noah said it was this happened in Dallas on this day. There was freezing rain at between 3 and 5 p.m. If you had three different companies telling you three different answers, there's no final say on that. It just creates a lot of problems all up and down our society, essentially, to not have that kind of final say in that information. So if you were to privatize the entire weather sphere, it would create its own set of chaos in addition to the weather chaos that we already deal with on a regular basis. So yeah, I just don't see how the feasibility would ever come to pass. But I could see it from maybe a modeling standpoint.
Okay, I mean that certainly helps, I think, alleviate at least some concerns Dave and I have had, about what could possibly happen in like worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it'd be
I,
pretty difficult
I
to
just don't
to
see how. Yeah,
yeah.
but you were right about that. They did, and Paul brought up too, the 2016 administration. They did think about that. They were trying to get the AccuWeather guy in as I think, National Weather Service director or NOAA director or something like that. And there was that whole effort there. But it doesn't work in practice. Yeah, it doesn't seem right that he could do it.
Right. And then, Derek, similar-ish question for you. How if NOAA were to be completely privatized and National Weather Service, et cetera, how do you think that would impact future careers for people like yourself or people even, in grade school? Because I know, I'm sure everybody here has a similar story that's at some point around third grade, give or take 2 years, that's when everybody got interested in the weather, and that's how the career goes from there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think when it comes to meteorology, it's obviously like it's like a fire in your soul kind of that like starts when you're young, like you said. I feel like people, they don't really, again, like my position, I don't really care too much if it's private or public or government. I just kind of, want to get my foot in the door. So I would say that, I think there might be like a transition period where there are less jobs for maybe like, I don't know, half a decade or something. But if you had a fully privatized thing, I would think that, the free market does have a tendency to kind of work itself out. And I think that maybe a decade down the line, it would return to be like what it once was. It's just, the transition would be an issue. And obviously, you have issues like you talked about with different companies trying to give different answers and make profit for themselves instead of the own government. So I don't know. That's what I'd say. I think people don't care too much about private public. It's just that transition that we're worried about.
From the
Right.
perspective of research,
Mhm.
there is some losses when uh, the research is mostly done by the corporate world. I mean, it's great when corporations do research, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but we have this vast research enterprise that is freely transferring our results to anyone who wants them.
Hmm.
Sometimes you might have to pay for a journal article or find another way to access it. That's a whole other question, but that information is available from this research, and anybody can get it and
Hmm.
use it for just about whatever they want. It's a little bit harder to do that when someone has a financial interest in investing in something for their own future gain. Um,
Yeah,
Again,
that
I support that kind of research solidly. It's just that
Yeah.
there's something missing if we don't have the other.
Yeah, it's very true. You're going to level the playing field for everyone and have that opportunity for everyone to, because like you say, that the people with the most money will do the research and they will keep it the most secret, and then for their own financial advantage, and the markets are elsewhere, and not for public safety. So it won't be going in the right direction. It basically people's taxpayer money won't be going to their own. The point of the whole thing is it's going to go for their own interest, their own safety and
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the field may become a lot more cutthroat if it did go that route. So,
Yeah, which, although I'll say it's good to hear that it hasn't really had too negative of an impact on it. It sounds like your career, or I'll assume anybody else that you've talked to about it, because that was another concern that Dave and I had. Because I know when I was in school, I didn't really know too much about private sector meteorology jobs, or that they were even really a thing, to be honest with you. And well, here we are now. But that's good though, that it doesn't seem to, because that would be an unfortunate circumstance if a lot of people, they're going in to college hoping to get a meteorology job. Or and they find out it's like, okay, well, the one place that I know about that I could get a job, National Weather Service, because they don't want to be, maybe they don't want to be a broadcast meteorologist, not really built for, not for everybody. um but it's good that, to hear that that's not necessarily the case. And we're a little low on time, so I'll just kind of quickly mention the final question. It's already, you guys have already kind of answered it. It's, how will the cuts to NOAA impact the future of U.S. weather forecasting, i.e., will we fall further behind the ECMWF? And I'll just quickly also mention, because our anonymous guest also gave something decent. His long story short, he said yes, most likely if the cuts go through, to research, especially that, with stuff like AI getting into the mix as well, that we could fall, they say specifically decades behind potentially. And it sounds like that, even if that could be the case for the public, and even if the private sector does manage to keep up, and feel free to disagree with me here at some point if I say something incorrect. It's that even if the private sector does keep up, that it won't be available to the public for free, which like defeats the purpose of it for the general public again, which not necessarily a bad thing, but not necessarily a good thing. So as closing comments, if anybody would like to take a stab at an opinion for that question, feel free.
I think that there's enormous uncertainty. Even if we do a lot of privatization, um, it could get really bad. We could get way behind, or there could be a lot of innovation if we set it up well. Key to setting it up well is getting the best minds in the field, in the private and public sectors together to come up with something that works. It could follow something like the ECMWF model or others, but or be something completely new. I think there's enormous risk for major losses of data and people totally leaving the field and joining other things because that's where they can get jobs. And there's potential for innovation. And if we put our minds in there and work that toward that happening, we can increase the potential of that outcome. Otherwise, we just sit back and watch a disaster unfold.
Yeah. We have time for one more comment. So
I was going to say that's kind of the hook. You got the first hook is the public safety importance, and the second hook is just falling behind other countries, and from a competitive standpoint, and that's a way to try to I don't know provoke the folks who are making the budget decisions to pay more attention to it, but that we were already falling behind, and this is going to make it worse as your anonymous person said. And to Paul's point, I mean, we do need to change the model of how we do all this, whether it is the ECMDF way of doing it or some other way, but we have to change the way we're doing things because it's not been working even up to before this year.
right. And so we're just about out of time. I'd like to thank all of you for your contributions. Great discussion. And I'd like to, hope that anyone who watches this video, they got something out of it that was, valuable, to hear that, that the National Weather Service, even with the current cuts, if the cuts get worse, if the cuts get better, a lot of uncertainty, but either way, the National Weather Service should still be your most trusted source. And just to thank everybody again for participating and to thank everybody for watching. Thank you.
Great talking, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, Michael.